Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D. I am your host, Jessica, and joining me this week we have Richard, who created the wonderful game, the Emmy award-winning game, Moonlight on Roseville Beach. Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting.
I'm so excited to have you on. Like many people, I discovered this fantastic document, and the tagline had me straight away because I saw it on the Any Spotlights Award. So many congratulations for you. And the tagline I saw was a queer game of disco and cosmic horror. And I was like, instantly sold. Fantastic. Does that summarize the game really well? Do we need to know any more? Is that?
It's very much a horror game with a strong horror comedy lean. We're working on some stuff right now. There'll be a little less horror comedy, but still has some comic potential there. And it is very much a tribute to 1970s gay beach towns or queer beach towns.
Absolutely love it. I'm so excited to talk to you more about this because I just the theme, the art direction of it, everything about it I thought was so great when I read about it, so I had to have you on. So I'm so glad you had the time to talk to me. If you are watching live, please do get involved and ask any questions. We'll try to answer them. And if you're listening to the podcast, any things we talk about, any links will be all in the show notes, so you can just click through and have a look there. But before we dig into talking about the game, I'm going to be very nosy and invasive, Richard, and ask about you and your life. So tell me, what about your first experiences with tabletop role-playing games? Do you remember the first game you played?
The first game I know I bought was the old Mulvey basic set of D&D. So sorry, not D&D fans who didn't want to hear me mention that, but it was a much different game. And then I think the first game I actually played was a friend's copy of the AD&D books. But, no one could find everything for all books, for all concurrent editions of the game. Okay. So we were sort of just piecing the game together for bits and pieces. I think we had a player's handbook and the GM screen and a copy of the basic set, and we just sort of winged it, which was a blast. So that was my very first, and then I went away from games for a long time, and then came back to as a World of Darkness fan in the 90s, which I think way more identifiable for a lot of contemporary listeners to kind of jump into the World of Darkness in the 1990s, and then I got to work for White Wolf very briefly in the late 90s, early aughts, and then just sort of. I think as people I know on the Pandas Talking Games podcast, I became polygamorous, and that was my sort of first time I really started playing multiple games at once. Is sort of after that point. So that's how I got involved and kind of stayed involved, and came back. So
I love that phrasing, polygamorous. I've not heard it before.
Yeah.
And of course, because we're live, I'm about to have a coughing fit, so I do apologize.
No worries.
But you were talking a little bit about the Any Judges Spotlight Awards. Can you tell us a little bit how that's changed the game and the audience?
That has been pretty exciting. We went from, we launched in late December digitally and early February physically. And had sold fairly well, but in the time since the Any Judges Spotlight announcement, I think we sold as many copies as the first 2 quarters of the year put together. I sort of hate that I've become the kind of publisher who now thinks in terms of in quarters of the year. But I also do royalties to authors, so I have to think in quarters of the year. But we sold as many copies as I think we did in the first 6 months of the year already, since the Any announcement came out in July. So that has been really fantastic. It's really opened up a lot of opportunities. It's gotten a lot of writers who had heard of the game and were interested in working on it move from being very, very interested to being really excited, and I'm really excited to work with them. Because now they can tell other people what they're doing and they don't get a blank look.
Yeah, and they're like, oh yeah, I heard about that in the Ennies, and you can be like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's a blast. So it's been really exciting because we've gone from can we release supporting products and expect to sell any of them to actually being able to sell some of our supporting products. So that's
Maybe
great.
it's two people asking you, is there more? Please, I would like some more. But today, let's talk about the core book, the one that people will be kind of picking up, that they can get on itch right now. So tell us a little bit about the game. So you talked about World of Darkness, which I noticed is a dice pool system, and has that influenced why you chose a D6 dice pool system for this game?
I think the biggest influence on why I picked the dice pool system for this game, and this is kind of the hard science of game design. In 2016, I played Meg Baker's Cyrun for the first time, which used dice pool that was the first place I ever experienced the kind of dice pools that we use in this game. Usually dice pools are either like take the highest number or count all your successes. John Harper kind of also does that with Lasers and Feelings, and then with Blades in the Dark and a few others, it's more of a like give me the highest number that you get. In that, you roll your dice pool and you start assigning them to different sorts of outcomes. And I've recently had the big privilege of playing Cyrun with Meg, who is working. I think publicly has not announced that she's working on a new edition of Cyrun, and that was really where every die had the potential to count in the die pool. So the bigger die pool you get, the more likely you are to have good outcomes because you have a chance to assign things and stay safe while you're succeeding. But I wanted that sort of not crunchiness. I wanted that sort of decision making because it's hard on the GM to then sit there and think like, oh, I see there's a mixed outcome here, but in the heat of the moment, I cannot think of anything that really fits what's going on, which is the harder thing about, and I love mixed outcome games. It's probably in the last 10, 15 years, mixed outcomes are probably one of my favorite developments in RPGs. But for a lot of GMs, including even myself, sometimes I just cannot think of what's supposed to happen on a mixed outcome. And other kind of dice sort of shift a lot of that onto the player who's like, I do this, but I don't get injured and I don't get scared. As a horror game, it's really important to me that people are not completely, able to just stare at things and embrace themselves and be okay. So I don't get scared, I don't get injured. So that sort of was the biggest influence on the dice pool. I think where I saw the World of Darkness influence come in was really sort of like that very concrete sense of place and time. A lot of us fell in love with World of Darkness, not for anything that was happening on the mechanical end, but because there was all those beautiful source books that were opening up very real specific locations to us and make us think about history and space and geography in ways that we had not brought into our games. And certainly Call of Cthulhu players were already sort of doing that. But World of Darkness, I think, hit a different group of people and thinking like, oh, wow, no, this makes cities real and we can make them part of our fiction and we can make our everyday lives part of our fiction and kind of our sense of where we are in time. Part of our fiction in very concrete ways. And I think that's how World of Darkness, I think, more than anything else, really influenced me.
Fantastic. Well, speaking about settings, this is set in a specific location. This is in Roseville Beach. Tell us about Roseville Beach. Paint a picture. Tell us where we are, and talk a little bit about your inspirations for why you decided to set it here.
Roseville Beach is a queer town on a barrier island called Rose Island, because I wanted it to sound as coherent as possible and be as easy to remember as possible. But barrier islands, for those of you who live on the U.S. Atlantic or Gulf Coast, would know that they're very narrow sandbar islands. They are frequently, in the case of Roseville Beach, which is, you can probably tell, an actual map that's been had the serial numbers filed off. is the actual, they tend to be very narrow. Roseville Beach is a few hundred feet from harborside to shoreside to where you actually get to the beach. And that was exciting to me because I grew up vacationing on the southern Gulf Coast, where barrier islands are, where so many of the nice beaches are on the southern Gulf Coast, and then came up to live in New York City. And so many of our great local vacation spots, such as Jones Beach Island or Fire Island, are these sorts of super narrow barrier islands that really kind of compress so many people together and kind of create a space that's so easy to walk around, it's so easy to navigate, and it's so easy to identify 10 key locations, which I think is just super important to just have 10 key locations. And I tell people, like, if GM's running Roseville Beach, add whatever you want to it. It's very much your table, your game. But really, in my version of Roseville Beach, these 10 locations are the businesses. Or, we expanded to 12 for the book, but these are the businesses that are in Roseville Beach. Everything else is somebody's house or apartment. And because the town is a summer, is one of those towns where the population in summer is a few thousand and the population in winter is a few dozen. That sort of compressed, kind of flexible space was super important to me, and it's very much inspired by this. I said this was obviously a real map with serial numbers filed off. This is a map of Cherry Grove, New York, which has been a queer space since the first half of the 20th century. A great British scholar named Jack Parlett really just did a fantastic book on the history of queer Fire Island, looking mainly at the arts, but also including so much of the other components. And Cherry Grove is kind of the oldest queer town there. But writers like James Baldwin and Frank O'Hara and W.H. Auden and Pat Highsmith all vacationed or spent time in Cherry Grove. And that was sort of so this is sort of my homage to that very sort of compressed setting that has a strong grounding in sort of a real queer space that I've gotten to know since moving north. So
fabulous. And talking about the location as well, like you say, when you're reading through the book, it feels like a place because you've got all these little locations that you see, and but also the people there as well, because you populate the town, like you say. There's some locals that are there constantly all the time. There's like a few dozen, so they would know each other, and there'd be familiar kind of faces. Could you talk a little bit about characters and NPCs, who will be playing and who will encounter when we walk into Roseville Beach?
So one of the things I wanted to ultimately do is a better NPC book, but I think one of the things that was really fun with kind of focusing the town so succinctly on that map is putting two NPCs in every location that were identifiable. And I think one of my favorite things is watching different GMs and players connect to and relate to those NPCs in ways that I never imagined. Like, I tried to keep those descriptions super succinct because I want people to read into them and connect with them as much as possible, and decide who they really like and who they don't like. And my version of some of them are so different. I think there's one of the bartenders at a bar called Rosie's, which is one of the options for a place you can work. And I always describe her as 32 going on 72, and a hardcore, like, 1970s Patti Smith fan. You know that she's working that night, because as soon as you walk in, it's just the depressing songs from Horses or What's On until somebody requests disco. And I love Patti Smith. So but then watching people connect with and identify different people. I recently ran a game for my local store, and I tried to let the players really sort of bring out the NPCs they worked with a lot. And because they have jobs in town, everybody who's a character or a longstanding character in a Roseville Beach campaign is situated in town in a job. So they really get to decide, is my my workmate Art or Vic or whoever, are they are they likable? Do I like them? Does everybody else like them but I don't? Do I like them but nobody else does? What are those things kind of going on there? And then you have like a lot of connections to kind of set stakes in your interpretation of the mysteries in the book, because then you have a chance to say like, oh no, something's happening and Vic's involved, and you're not really sure that Vic knows what he's doing, or and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, it's Vic again, or it's oh, not my friend Vic, or oh gosh, Vic covered for me last week, I owe him big. So but those kind of stakes that sort of bring mysteries that help mysteries connect with a player. So
it sounds like you've got all these NPCs, and when you're running the game, you really just let the players lean into the ones that make sense to them, and then just run with it and let it happen. We have had a question coming in from the D20 Future show about how, because you mentioned earlier you really liked mixed outcomes, and they've asked how you would recommend helping player-led mixed outcomes in a game.
Yeah, no. So in Roseville Beach, instead of having put it on the GM to mix outcomes, there is a goals table. You assign your dice once you roll your pool to your goal, and then your risk of getting injured, and then if that's on the table, and then a risk of getting scared if that's on the table. And the players decide like, oh, I've got 6s and I've got 1 6 and 2 1s from this. That's as good as I've got. So I'm gonna succeed, but I'm gonna get injured or scared, or I'm not gonna succeed. I'm just gonna give up succeeding, but I'm not gonna get injured. So that's sort of how we lean into letting them sort of decide what the mixed outcome is for them. And then they can look at, because you really can only get scared 3 times or injured 3 times before in some sense you're out, and there's some guidance in the GM section on what it means to go out, or what it means to kind of recover from those injuries and scares. You can they as the player can decide like, okay, I only have 1 injury, but I've got 2 scares, and if I get scared 1 more time, I'm going to freak out and run out. I'll probably end up freaking out and running out of the building, but I can take 1 more injury and be okay, mostly okay. And then that can affect your future rolls. You get, if you're not injured or scared in a way that affects what you're trying to do, that helps your die pool improve by 1 die. If you are, you don't get that bonus die. But and I tried not to have them pulling dice out of the pool. I tried to stick with things that add to the pool, or conditions for adding to the pool. So, I hope that makes sense. Let me know if not. So
Yeah, no, definitely. One question I had is, so this is quite like a narrative game, and especially when you're sometimes leaning to players and giving them narrative control, obviously that's really great, but sometimes that can be intimidating for new players if you're used to something more structured. So do you have any kind of guidance on how to help players if they're having that moment where they're struggling to come up with kind of ideas and feel on the spot? Because I know I've had it at my table where I had a player where I'd be like, and then what happens? And they just kind of froze. So I don't know if you have any advice or guidance in kind of, helping players that may be new to kind of narrative or creating things on the fly.
I think these kind of mixed outcomes actually help players. They don't have to decide how they're injured. I can kind of talk them through, like, so they're like, you said injuries on the table, and if I get injured, what is it likely to be? Like, I'm climbing a fence. Is it, I fall on the fence? Is it I fall off the fence? Is it, describe the, remind me what this fence is like. Are there sharp corners? Is it high off the ground? Or, if I give up that success on my goal, what does that mean? What does it mean to give up the success on my goal? Is it like, am I just kind of on the other side? Is it I've been discovered or spotted before I can get over the fence? What's going on there? And I think when they get a concrete sense of choice, they do need a little extra time sometimes to make those choices, but they're you're giving them some concrete dimensions of things to kind of choose from, rather than sort of like, and I think it's the classic PBT advice, just, give people hard choices, but sort of made a little bit more concrete, and they can sort of visualize as they're, Dai was brilliant and put everything, the art director was brilliant and put all the tables on one set of pages. So it's really easy for me to grab that, print it out, and put that in front of somebody as a handout. And they can sort of visualize all the dice they need to place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we also borrowed that from Meg Baker's Siren. She has a nice play mat where you can see all the tables where you need to place dice. So that to me, that tends to really help the player not freeze, because they're like, if they're freezing, they're having a genuine decision moment, where they actually need to make a decision. They're not freezing like, I never ask a player to tell me how they were injured. I really kind of put you're climbing a fence. Injury might include falling onto the picket, or it might include falling off the fence on the side and twisting your ankle or landing wrong, or it might include getting spotted and have somebody throw something at you when you thought nobody would be able to see you. And I sort of let them know what the risks are, and then I make that call as to what the actual injury is. But they make the call whether or not they get injured. Does that help? Make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah. My next question I was going to move on to, so we talked a little bit about the location and kind of the NPCs and the world, but I wanted to dig into the characters that people will be playing. So if people are listening to this and be like, okay, I'm liking this location, I'm liking the sound of Roseville Beach. If I want to create a character to walk through there, what's character creation process look like, and who could I play?
Well, you've done a great job in pulling those two things up, because they kind of illustrate the two kinds of characters there are in Roseville Beach. There's long-term campaign characters who are people who work on the island. All of those characters have an origin story that sort of builds most of their skills. That's where did you really come from? And of course, some of them are supernatural. I think the one I always include whenever I do a set of pre-gens or run at a convention, I always include at least one shifter, because people like having that one supernatural origin. But the shifter is not just a shifter. They're also a person who comes from the suburbs, or maybe they come from a small town, or maybe they come from a nearby city. And the same thing with other origin stories that are not supernatural in origin. There's somebody like the Fresh Face who's very young and new and has a chance to re-roll lots of dice as sort of a special ability, but they don't have quite as many skills. And somebody who's older and has a little more skills. And then they have a job on the island that sort of situates them, where they are this summer in 1979. Where are they working? And that kind of tells you a little bit kind of the things that the player is interested in, who they know. Are they a person working at the little clinic on the island called the Roseville Care Center? Are they working in one of the bars? Are they working in are they a piano player? Or are they a backup dancer for a drag queen? Or who are they kind of working for and with? And then there's always one strange event that's happened to them that sort of cued them in that Roseville Beach is a strange, weird, unusual place. So those are the three parts of those players. But then we also have a set of characters who are ready to run for your drop-in players, for those players who show up and just like, hey, I want to I'm here in town this one weekend and I want to play with your group if I can. And those are called guest stars. And they are people who come to the island on vacation or to do research or for some strange ulterior motive. And they range from the ultra strange and supernatural. I think we have somebody who was an ancient Greek soldier who was turned to stone by Medusa, and then had been stored in somebody's house on Roseville Beach before as an art object, and then sort of woke up. Or just a local high school teacher who comes out for 1 week a year, and that's the vacation they can afford. We have a whole bunch kind of in that range. And I had three great writers as a core, Alison Saib and Sharon Biswas, write that section. The high school teacher was the only one I got to contribute to that, because they came up with so many great ones.
Yeah, fantastic.
And
I guess I was going to say, I guess this is great for one shots as well. If people don't want to create characters, you just say, yeah, let's just sit down, let's play something. Here's a load of options. Go.
Yeah. I tend to bring pre-gens that kind of show off the character creation system, but but that's because I'm trying to sell the game. A lot of people just show up with quick with quick with guest star characters. I've had somebody stream the game who sort of wrote his own little guest star character for a drop-in player who comes every alternate, occasional sessions. And because the format is pretty easy to imitate, I think we pulled the idea of guest stars. Ezekir and I sort of worked on that. And we pulled the idea of guest stars from Troika, the way Troika does character creation by just sort of like, hey, here's a weird person you are, give them a name.
Yeah.
And that's very much the feel we wanted for guest stars. Something that would be easy to grab onto and range from the really weird to the really sort of everyday person who just gets entangled in this your regular investigation group's supernatural mystery. So lots of things happening there. So
speaking of supernatural mysteries, I'd like to dig into the kind of stories that we'll be telling. What happens at Roseville Beach? What stories are we going to be telling?
The 5 mysteries that are in the core book range from everything from a drag queen who's the sole or lead drag queen at a venue, and the couple who own the venue are breaking up and are. I'm hoping this is not too much of a spoiler, but she begins seeing things during her performance, which freaks her out. She flees, and there's a chance that, not having their star drag queen, the venue is going to close. And so sort of they're called on to, the investigators are called on to sort of figure out what's going on and who's summoning these strange visions, what's causing them, what's causing this haunting. There is, for people who want a slightly more mature theme scenario, Maxwell Lander wrote a great little scenario that's set in a bathhouse in the woods. There's a strange bathhouse in the woods, and it's playing rock music, and it's been taken over. It's been taken over by some really powerful supernatural forces that have caused people to start disappearing into the bathhouse. And you need to sort of go in and rescue them. Cat Ramen did Girls Before Swine. Sorry, I talked about those in reverse order, which is about the goddess Circe coming back to Roseville Beach because she was summoned thinking that a local amateur hour sorcerer could control her. And she sort of takes the side, she sort of begins having strange effects on Roseville Beach, on the people who thought they could sort of summon and sort of bind her. And people start transforming. And those are, I think 3 or 4, that's 3 of them. And then there's a whole GM section with several more leads in the GM section on things you can sort of build in to your Roseville Beach campaign, lots of starters. Rick Chia wrote about a strange pillar that's sticking out of a sand dune to the one side of town. There is an offshore lighthouse where supernatural events have been occurring. There were several things, because this is very firmly set in 1979. There's rumors of things that happened in 1978 that are mysterious events that still have people around who remember them and may have repercussions for people who are still there. So there's lots of additional sort of leads going on. And in this particular book, I really sort of tried to make sure that our cosmic horror was very much grounded in entities that the players could confront. That it was never just strange random gods showing up. It was also because somebody summoned them, because somebody had an agenda and summoned them, and now they've sort of lost control of this sort of aggressive magic. So
Cthulhu's not turning up. There's not going to be, Cthulhu rising out of the beach. It's not that level of cosmic horror.
No, because I think at this point, everybody knows that if you run a boat in Cthulhu, he goes back to sleep.
I didn't know that. So, there's
sorry. Spoilers on Call of Cthulhu for people. I joked recently on Twitter that I don't think a god is very tough if you can just run a boat to him and he goes back to sleep.
Well. We've all had days like that, some things that are both running into this. I'm going back to bed. No.
In that story, I sympathize with Cthulhu entirely.
Absolutely. Totally relatable.
You try to wake up, somebody runs a boat into you, and you're back.
Exactly.
But no, Cthulhu is not coming. There are other strange entities that will come, but they will almost always be tied to some mortal's agenda. The goddess Circe, the something else is almost always tied to somebody else's mortal agenda.
Okay. So I love you have a section like how to run Roseville Beach, and you do spell it out really nicely, almost like building blocks with, okay, this is how you do it. You need the context, you need the event and what happened and all this stuff, which makes it really clear for people to kind of write their own, mysteries and things like that and have that set up. One thing I was wondering is, as you said, it's set in 1979. Now, some people listening and watching may not have been alive at that time. Have you ever had any interesting experiences where people, because I don't know if you knew this, but a young person said to me the other day, "Oh, were you born in the late 1900s?" Which was quite the phrase that took my breath away. And I was like, yes, but what a way to phrase that. But anyway, for people that weren't around in the late 1900s, have you had any interesting experiences of players trying to connect with that time,
The two big ones are drinking age and cell phones. And I expected cell phones. I did not expect it to be so confusing to people because this is, most of my audience is in the US. And in the 80s, we reset our drinking age to 21, just kind of across the board, across the nation. But in the 70s, people at the age of 18 could not only drink, they could work in bars, they could be barbacks, they could be bartenders. There was no restriction on that. Maybe in a few localities or states, but there was not some sort of national restriction on that. So that's always a fun one to try to explain. Also, our drug laws were not so draconian in the 70s. They were, that was sort of an 80s thing that our drug laws became draconian. So people are a little less freaked out if somebody is doing something illegal because it does not necessarily result in everything getting shut down or everyone getting investigated. Those are two kind of goofier ones. The big one is cell phones. Everybody has kind of forgotten how we sort of rendezvoused in an era before we had cell phones. And it's a little easier in Roseville Beach. It's most of the bars are on a couple of strips of boardwalk. There are no cars there even now. So there's a lot of you can't really call somebody to check on where they are, but you can literally just kind of walk around the strip of bars and go like, are they here? No. Are they here? I don't see them. It's crowded, but I don't see them. Are they over here? So there's I think that's the biggest struggle people have is remembering that they don't have cell phones. They actually have to go find their friends. Either, if they're not at home and not answering their phone, then you have to go kind of around town and look for them. Yeah.
That's very true. I remember that I was walking somewhere with my nephew and there was a payphone and he went, "Oh, what's that?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's just a public payphone you can use. So, people can call each other when they're out and about." And he's like, "Oh, that's a good idea for when you leave your cell phone at home by mistake." And I was like, sure. Yeah. Cause that was the context, cause his whole life it's been a thing. So yeah, I can imagine that's definitely a thing. One thing I want to talk about is I've been flicking through some images on the live stream and links are in the show notes for people to go have a look at the art on your website. I want to talk about the art and it's all public domain stuff. Is that right?
That is entirely public domain art. I can take credit for none of it. Dai Shigarza, art director, did all the public domain research. And one of the reasons that we just, one of the upsides is that I got to really sort of like, let Dai do everything they wanted to do with art and not worry about art budget. We could really focus on paying Dai to do the research. The downside is just public domain art is so focused on attractive women and men who are in action. And they're almost all white. Non-white characters tend to get stereotypically presented. And and so there's just that downside to using public domain art. We did an intro at the beginning of the book that sort of touched on sort of like, here's the sources we used, and we're very inspired by, but we know that there's lots of limitations in public domain art. There's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of diversity in body type, much less race and ethnicity. And they tend to be fairly binary in their gender presentation. So those are the downsides of public domain art that we were really lucky to have Dai do just some incredible research and identify things that had either lapsed into the public domain during the 50s and 60s, where things could still lapse, where they weren't automatically renewed, and even older stuff that has long been in the public domain, just because it's after, I think, 1928 right now, 1927, something like that. But that's sort of kind of where we were with the public domain art, and it was just it really kind of let Dai kind of loose to do some of these beautiful things, where even inside the book we're doing things that look like classic pulp novel covers, where we brought our own context in.
The art selection is absolutely beautiful, and the way it's laid out, it really leans into the slightly creepy cosmic horror, but still like pulpy, fun, and camp and queer. So I think the selection of art is absolutely stunning, and really kind of draws you in and gives you an understanding of the tone and the type of game that you're playing. With the type of cosmic horror that is kind of a bit campy and fun, do you have any guidance for GMs for like setting the tone and setting the vibe of the game to let people know what sort of game they're in store for?
I generally, what I generally do is just kind of let people know where we are and kind of what we're up to. And I usually have people almost automatically click with what's going on as soon as we sort of do the strange events and we introduce the scenario. The tone that I usually have to remind people of is that we're generally engaged in some level of heroics. I call it a game of cosmic horror, but this is cosmic horror seen through the eyes of people like Clive Barker and Stephen King, where when you encounter it, you're not immediately running, screaming, and hiding. You're kind of a functional person, but so there's some heroics involved in this, but there's also it's a very street level variety of heroics. There's some supernatural things you can do, but you can't save the world in one session or even a campaign. You're here to kind of keep Roseville Beach as intact as you can during the summer of 1979, and kind of hopefully set it up so it'll be here next year as well.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So but it's very much that sense of street level heroics. You're not going to radically change the nature of reality or get rid of all bad people, but you're going to kind of keep them at bay for a summer, assuming you don't get too scared or too injured to function. But people, I feel like once I introduce this setting and sort of the concept of the game, they tend to sort of lean into and get it. That these are people there's people you want to protect. You're the only person there. You cannot rely on the police on the mainland who view Roseville Beach as a place they used to be able to go arrest gay people for being gay, and now they're mad and won't show up again until they can just do that. So it's kind of all up to you, and people generally kind of get the tone from there, and both the horror and the comedy sort of kind of arise from their decisions of what to pursue and what to kind of focus on and how to approach it.
Fab. So if people have been listening to this and they're intrigued and they're interested, where's the best place for them to go to pick up a copy?
In the US, you can get one we sell to tons of local game stores. People sometimes ask me, like, do you sell better on drive-thru or Hitch? And I think we actually sell our best to local game stores through Indie Press Revolution in North America. Right now in the UK, I don't think we have a local store who's selling in the UK. And so, if you have it in your local store, I always recommend getting your local store. I think print in the UK, drive-throughs, print on demand service is where most of my customers are getting it right now. Or picking up the PDF on Itch, and we have the link on Itch. And because Itch will let me link to any other site in the world, I think I have put most of the places you can pick it up on the Itch site. And then also, but if you want the PDF, Itch is one of the best places that includes the PDF itself, the EPUB version, and we have for extreme accessibility needs, or for super simple needs, we also do just the plain text Google Doc is linked from the Itch page for any person who's bought it. So you can make a link there, or you can make your own local copy and sort of make handouts or whatever you need for your table from that sort of like really plain text copy right there. And then also both drive-through and Itch include a consent sheet and on-ground character or on in-person character sheets and an online character sheet. Hosted in Google Docs, but also a consent sheet hosted in Google Apps for Itch and then Excel for drive-through.
Yeah, just so you can be sure that everyone wants to play the game that you're putting forward and everyone's happy with the themes and everything like that. Particularly in a game like this, which has horror in and it has, maybe more risque adult themes, like you mentioned, like the bathhouse and things. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, always a good idea. And I guess, so book's out now, people can get it at friendly local gaming stores or online. Got your Annie Award. What's next for Roseville Beach?
Right now, we have 2 zines that are out. One by me that is just called Characters, which is some new character options for Roseville Beach. The zine series is actually going to get collected next year into a project called Dim All the Lights, which will be a compatible standalone game. That's another way World of Darkness sort of inspired me. I really like the notion of compatible standalone games. So anytime you spend $30-something on a book, I want you to be able to take that book home and play that book without needing another book. But it'll be entirely compatible with Moonlight on Roseville Beach. It'll have the quick start. It'll have the same rules as the quick start. But right now we included all the character options from that into a new zine called Characters that included some things that we didn't really get to include in the main book for character ideas, both in terms of jobs and origin stories. And then what I'm really excited about is a collaborator named Nora Rose, who I have the huge privilege of working with. It wrote something called Entities, which is, and Roseville Beach doesn't have monster stats. It's really, you address the creature that you're facing, or the cult you're facing, or the group you're facing in the fiction. I think in the GM section, I say, like, most creatures, if you can figure out a way to hurt it, it should never need to be hurt more than 3 times. Before it's sort of off screen. Cthulhu sinks below the waves again, or whatever. You should never, if you can figure it, 3 boats. You should never need to do that more than 3 times. It's more of a matter of figuring out, how do you hurt this thing. So I kind of gave Nora the challenge of, like, we don't really have a bestiary in Roseville Beach per se. We have, the mysteries and some mystery leads. Like, how would you write a bestiary for a game that doesn't have creature stats or monster stats or opponent stats of any sort? And Nora came back with, for those of you who know the SCP Foundation Wiki, which is a fictional monster hunting organization that exists entirely in the imaginations of people on the internet, and it is a fantastic source. Nora gave me investigation documents for 5 different entities who may show up on Roseville Beach, and they range from a paired group of star vampires who have been stalking the area around Roseville Beach, and then 2 years ago started showing up periodically in Roseville Beach. And what you have there is the investigation notes of a detective who has since gone missing, about people he was investigating who had gone missing, including the most recent one from Roseville Beach itself. And then there's as an homage to classic DnD, there's a mimic creature that was dug from the depths of the ocean and has a strange ability to just imitate anyone. There is something that has killed a park ranger in the woods, and all you have is his sort of like park ranger log to kind of go on and figure out what that is. And then there is a diary of a young woman who disappeared the summer before. And there is something that is very obviously to anyone who's read it, a CIA front organization.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is the last entity, Nora, because in the 70s, as spooky as the CIA has always been, in the 70s, they were at the height of their spookiness. That was kind of the end of sort of their LSD research and sort of a pinnacle of the CIA just assuming they could do anything to anyone wherever and have no consequences. And Nora sort of brought that kind of forward from the 50s and 60s into the late 70s. Or some of the stories we know from the 50s and 60s into the late 70s, and has a CIA front organization sort of situated there in Roseville Beach, which I immediately added to the next thing that's coming up, which is the Bracknell Horror, which is an adventure that will also include all the quick start rules. That'll be the third thing coming out of our zine series, and that organization will show up in that adventure as well. So we had, and the entities book includes a little sort of mystery generator at the back that I wrote based on the stuff that Nora had given us, and so that was really, I am super excited about that entity zine. I had a blast writing the character zine, but when Nora handed in the entities, I was just like, how do you show me up on my own project all the time? But Nora is brilliant and just one of the most exciting people I get to work with. So one of the many exciting people I get to work with. But so that's kind of what's going on right now. We are also coming to the end of our initial 2 offset print runs. And we are funding a separate new offset print run that will also fund some hardbacks. And if it does well, it will also fund a new set of PDF mysteries for Moonlight and Roseville Beach. That'll be pretty inexpensive on drive-through and Hitch, but they'll be even cheaper if we fund them as part of this upcoming Kickstarter. And that's going to kick off, I think, October 17th.
Fantastic. But I put the link in the show notes and on the screen if you want to follow that, so you'll just get notified when it goes live.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's one I'll put in my diary for sure. Nice. That's all exciting stuff. So it's good to see there's more stuff coming. So plenty more things coming on, plenty more mysteries to be had, and more inspiration for your games and campaigns of this. That's fantastic to hear. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing and talking about the game, and congratulations again on the award. I do have a last question for you though, which is, do you have any RPGs you're loving at the moment, or any recommendations you'd like to shout out for people?
2 I've recently gotten to play over the past year that has just been one of my absolute favorite pulp hero RPGs ever is City of Mist. And City of Mist has just been an absolute blast. It is a return to big book RPGs, but with very low mechanics. It's sort of like reimagining a big book RPG without like a really heavy sort of mechanical load on the players. So there's not like 100 pages of setting and then 200 pages of like if you're rolling initiative, then the dice work like this. It's really just a very kind of it's a PBTA game with some strong Fate influences in there, and it's one of my absolute favorites to sit down and play. I recently got to run for Dungeon Crawl Classics Day at my friend the local game store, and I continue to love Dungeon Crawl Classics as just a really, really fun dungeon crawling fantasy game. I think it has so much potential for just it's all kinds of fantasy, but it's so really, really good at just doing simple dungeon crawling too. One that I have loved in its zine form that is coming to Kickstarter, I think next Friday, this Friday.
Oh, exciting.
Is Nora Rose's Beecher's Bibles. And I have never gotten to actually sit at a table and play it, but it is one of the many games that Nora produced that made me contact her and ask her if she'd be willing to work on Roseville Beach. But Beecher's Bibles is an American slang expression from the 19th century. Henry Ward Beecher was an abolitionist preacher in New York, and Beecher's Bibles was a slang expression for shipping guns to Kansas to fight against slaveholders who were trying to move into the Kansas territory and turn Kansas into a slave state. It is a really, really fantastic game. About it, and we talk about like that kind of street level action, but like you're not superheroes, you're just ordinary people who've decided to show up and try to help abolish slavery in this particular territory. And then Jex Thomas has recently released what I think is kind of becoming one of my favorite urban fantasy monster hunting games, and it's, you know, my weakness 100%. Is sort of those urban fantasy games that have a really tight little setting and time period that they're situated in. And this is a small town, I think it's in the Northeast, called Last Pines. And it's set in 1994. And you are locals in Last Pines who are trying to investigate supernatural phenomenon going on. Very strong vibes of Buffy and Supernatural, but very, very constrained to that like one kind of period. So it's like Jex wrote this game to make me love it. Like this very focused setting. And I am not normally a Forged in the Dark person. I think it's a perfectly fine system, but it's not one that normally I get excited about. But Bum in the Dark has changed that for me. And it is the very first Forged in the Dark game that I'm just this enthusiastic about. So yeah, that is kind of 4 games that I am really, really excited to play, run, and read right now. So
fantastic. Well, those are some great recommendations, and I feel like there's a little bit of something for everybody because there's a big variety in there. So hopefully some things for other people to check out, and maybe some ideas for me to steal for new guests coming to the show, which is why I always ask that question. Well, that is bringing us up to the top of the hour. I've stolen an hour of your time, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing the game with us.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Love to have you back on for any other future games you have, so do keep us up to date. And if people want to stay up to date with you, where can they find you online to keep in touch?
All right. You can find me on Blue Sky, Twitter, and Instagram at rrook Studio with no spaces. And then because I was really, really not paying attention to what I was doing, you can find me on Mastodon at r-rook at dice.com.
Okay.
I think I'm r-rook.studio on Tumblr, but that's, you know, if you're a hardcore Tumblr person, you will figure out where to find me. And I think r-rook.studio is my blog. And then on itch, where I also copy most of my blog posts too, is r-rook.hitch.io.
Fantastic. Seems quite consistent online. So r-rook, Google that and you'll find you anyway. Okay.
Yeah,
well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to everyone that watched and listened. We will be back next week with another new indie tabletop RPG to share with you. Thank you very much for coming on, Richard, and thank you very much to everybody for listening. That's all for this week.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks.